This ain't just a channel, this is BBTV.
Sometimes the music, it doesn't come from momentum. Sometimes it comes from stillness you didn't ask for. Tonight's Jukebox Journey isn't about a genre or charts. It's about what happens when a young artist is forced to stop moving physically, creatively, and has to decide what gets built in the quiet. This is the story of Forrest Frank. He's a young'un, I know, but it's an incredible story if you ask me. A broken back, a season of faith, and how that pause led to a song called Lemonade. Yeah, it's fitting. Let's talk about the moment everything changed.
A boss be rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel road to the neon dream, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss be rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it.
All right, welcome back in. Now, before y'all say anything, yes, I'm in a comfortable outfit. This is my pajamas, y'all. All right, let me tell you something. We get one cold day a year, I think, in Texas for, and I don't care. I just don't care. I am warm, I'm comfortable. And yes, this thing has feet. I have pajamas with feet on. And guess what? The back zips up too. Amen. Well, hello there. Who I got here? Hi, Chris. Good to see you. Thanks for being here. All right. So welcome in, everyone. If you're new here, this is Jukebox Journey. And before we go any further, I want to tell you exactly what this space is and what it isn't. Okay. This isn't a genre show. It's not a chart rundown, and it's not about nostalgia for nostalgia's sake. Here on Jukebox Journey, hi, it's Rosie. Good to meet you. Happy to have you. Welcome in. Please shout out. You got it. Definitely, Rosie. There you go, honey. Y'all get in there, find Rosie, get over there and check it out. I take care of the elderly caregiver 20 years supporting residents with Alzheimer's. Thank you, Chris. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate you. You are very welcome. It's Rosie. Ah, thank you. That's very sweet for you to say. Okay, so here on Jukebox Journey, we follow people, okay, not playlists. And we look at real human connections behind the music, who crossed paths with who and how they met, what shifted because of that meeting, and what came after. Sometimes that connection is collaboration. Sometimes it's conflict. And you know what? Sometimes it's family and faith or injury and loss or a moment that forces everything to slow down, whether you're ready or not. We don't do discographies here, really. Okay. We don't do group artists because they sound alike, and we definitely don't rush past the hard parts to get to the highlight reel. This show exists because music doesn't come from just nowhere. It comes from lived life. And, when you understand the relationships behind a song, the pressure, the pause, the belief, pardon me, my granddaughter's here. I hear her hollering. So it stays longer, right? Tonight's journey is one of those stories. It centers on Forrest Frank and a season where movement stopped physically and creatively, and stillness kind of took over. A season, shaped by faith and family and recovery. And out of that stillness came work that carries gratitude instead of bitterness, reflection instead of noise. And one of the outcomes of that season is a song called Lemonade. Now, if you've watched any of our shows, especially our Ladies Diary, I have the most special co-host, Miss Davina Lyons, Mama Lyons. She stepped into this, and the first thing she talked about was lemonade. And this one had me thinking about her today. Love this woman. And lemonade it's amazing. Just the concept. It doesn't have to be just the song. It doesn't have to be because Mama Lion said it. It is the concept. You have to find the good in the bad. Otherwise, it's going to drive you nuts, right? So we're going to talk about why that song matters, not as a trend, but as a reflection of what happens when someone chooses to build, thank you. Bye, it's Rosie. I got you shouted out, honey. But before we break that down, though, I really want to anchor tonight in something that reminds us why these stories matter in the first place. Because music doesn't just change an artist, okay? It changes listeners. And sometimes the most honest perspective comes from someone who lived long enough to recognize faith, gratitude, and growth when they see it. Pardon me, I have to have a drink here. You'll have to forgive me. I'm still recovering from losing my voice and everything. It's also that season in Texas. We have 2 springs instead of a spring and a fall. So, now, before we go any further, I want to ground this in something real, because when music carries faith and recovery and gratitude, it doesn't just land on playlists. It lands in people's lives, especially people who've lived long enough to know what it means to lose momentum, rebuild trust, and find, how old am I respectfully? I am 54 years old. Thanks for asking. So, rebuild trust, find people you didn't expect. We got a letter from a woman who's close to my age, very close. In fact, I think she is my age. She didn't write this as a super fan, okay? She wrote it as someone who has walked through life, watched younger generations struggle, and felt genuinely thankful that someone she admires made it through the hard part. So I'm going to let y'all hear this letter real quick.
I'm 54 years old, and I don't usually write letters like this. I've lived long enough to know better than to put people on pedestals. But I also know when something good deserves to be acknowledged. I started listening to Forrest Frank's music during a season when I was trying to reconnect with my faith. Not in a loud way, but in a quieter, more honest one. What struck me wasn't just the sound. It was the peace behind it. When I learned about his accident, about him breaking his back, my first thought wasn't about music at all. It was relief that he survived. Relief that his family didn't lose him. Relief that his life didn't stop where it could have. As a woman who's raised kids, watched friends bury loved ones, and prayed more times than I can count, that mattered to me. Seeing him continue to create after that, grounded in faith, supported by family, and not pretending the pain didn't happen, changed how I look at my own walk. It reminded me that healing doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes it comes with gratitude. His music helped me slow down. It helped me listen, and in a world that moves too fast, that's a gift. I'm thankful he's still here. I'm thankful he's still creating. And I'm thankful for the reminder that faith, when it's lived and not performed, can ripple outward in ways we never see. With respect and gratitude, a listener who's been around long enough to know.
I just want to say I should probably turn the mute back on. No, sorry. Thank you for this letter, seriously, because I think what you wrote really isn't fandom. It's recognition. And that distinction matters when we're talking about faith. Gratitude. Okay. The kind of admiration that comes from having actually lived someone's life or some life, what stayed with me most, okay, was that when you learned Forrest Frank broke his back, your first response wasn't about his career or his music or what might come next. It was relief. Relief that he survived it. Relief that his family didn't lose him or he didn't lose, functions. Just relief that the story didn't end in the place where it very easily could have. And that tells me exactly why this conversation belongs here. Because this isn't a success story first. It's a sequence story, just like all of our others. A physical injury like that, it doesn't interrupt a body, it interrupts momentum and identity and independence and speed all at once. And when you're young and gifted and moving fast, stillness can feel like punishment, but stillness is also where clarity has a chance to survive. What I hear in Forrest Frank's work since that season is not urgency or proving or performance, it's grounding, it's steadiness. It's music that doesn't sound like it's trying to convince anyone of anything. And that's usually the first sign that faith is being lived instead of performed. Faith that's lived doesn't shout, it settles. And you can hear that across his catalog. Not perfection, not polish for the sake of image, but presence, reflection, and definitely gratitude that doesn't pretend pain ever existed. When you talk about how his faith and family centered life changed your own walk, I understand that completely. Because when someone models belief without ego, without spectacle, without needing an audience to validate it, it creates permission for other people to soften instead of harden, especially those of us who have lived long enough to know how easy it is to become guarded. That's where lemonade fits into this story so naturally, because lemonade as an idea isn't denial. It doesn't pretend lemons weren't sour. It acknowledges that fully. And then it makes a conscious decision about what comes next. And that's a perspective that hits really differently depending on where you are in life. Younger listeners may hear optimism, but those of us who have raised kids, buried friends, watched marriages survive or fail, prayed prayers that didn't come with guarantees, and learned how fragile life really is. It's something else entirely. We hear survival and perspective and choice. That's why that song isn't just catchy or comforting, it's reflective. And reflection only comes from someone who has to sit still long enough to listen to themselves. I think that's true for a lot of songwriters. And I mean, I'm using Forrest because, oh, sorry, I can't do that thing anymore. I'm using Forrest because, well, I mean, honestly, he's got videos out that shows he's laying in his bed with a broken back writing songs. And it's not the fame that it seems like he's going after to me. That's my opinion. You may think differently, but I don't think it's the fame. I think it's the fact that he loves what he's doing. And I really think that that's how it starts out for a lot of artists too, So, sorry. Okay. What's important here, I think, though, and again, this is my opinion. I am not by any means, I don't, I love music. That's all I need to tell you. Okay. Because if you love music, you'd understand where I'm coming from with this. My whole thing is showing that these artists are human too, because I think we forget that so often. We really do. And they have situations that we have common ground with these people. I think that's one thing that they lose too, is just as soon as they realize that the common ground is not so common anymore because their life changed, not because ours did. I think that becomes really important too. And I don't feel like this young man is doing that. And yes, the fact that his music is faith-based, it does make a big difference when you're looking through, a microscope, probably. But my issue here is that when I listen to music, I don't think about the person as their politics or their religion or anything like that. I think of the depth of their talent and what they've done with it in life, not just for themselves, for others too. Because let's face it, if I had the money, I would go out and do for others too, but I don't. So if you don't want to use your money, use your talent. That's why I'm on YouTube. I'm hoping maybe one of these days somebody will actually say, hey, you know what? I like listening to you. I have had a couple of people tell me that. My Patty friend, she tells me that a lot. My Tracy doll, she tells me that a lot. And let me tell you, those are definitely two wonderful women. And let me tell you something else. It doesn't matter if there are 2 or 200. The fact that I have 2 is what keeps me on here. The fact that they had 5 billion is what kept them going. You just are at different levels. We still have common ground. Okay. Sorry, I went off script on that one. I'm totally tangent today. All right. What's important here, and always what Jukebox Journey comes back to, is that no one walks through a season like that alone. And you don't come out the other side unchanged unless you're surrounded by people who help you stay oriented. Family matters here. Community matters here. The people who were present during recovery matter just as much as talent ever could, because they shape what a person builds when the noise is gone. We've talked about this all week long. And Askaby as well. I have a noon show. Pardon me. I keep forgetting to promo myself, but VB does that later. Here's my point. When an artist emerges from a season of injury or fear and forced stillness, still choosing humility, still choosing faith and gratitude, that it isn't a branding decision. It's formation. You can't fake that, and you can't rush it either. It shows up in how someone speaks, how they write, and how they carry themselves when the spotlight isn't demanding anything. You said his music helped you slow down. I'm going to be honest here. I will say the same thing. I will. I go and I watch my own dang shorts that I've used his music with, and I watch the shorts, and it's just a clip, a 1-minute clip, but it still helps me in my mood. Music does that to people. It doesn't matter what genre it is. It gives you faith anyway. You can be sitting here listening, listening to Guar, okay? And it's still the same effect. If you're in that mood, you know what? Pull you out some Limp Biscuit. You know what song I'm talking about. Just break it, okay? It doesn't matter what song it is. Your mood mixes. And sometimes you want to hear that song just because that's what you're feeling, and it helps you get some of that aggression out because you know you're singing every dang thing you know and owning it. And you got the head banging. And you got the food. Well, I've seen my husband mosh. Let's just put it that way. Here's the thing. Okay? And I want to stay on this for a moment, because in a world that rewards speed, slowness is resistance. Okay. Reflection is resistance. Peace is resistance. And music that offers those things without demanding anything back becomes more than entertainment. It becomes companionship. My whole point. I can go and listen to some Dolly Parton, and it's not going to have the same effect on me as Metallica. Okay? And yes, I listened to both avidly. My first concert was Metallica. Guess what my second concert was? You thought it was Dolly. No, it was Metallica again. Okay? Faith No More opened up for them, and Guns N' Roses was on the backside. And I've been to a billion since then because that was the best. But that's not what we're talking about here. Okay, that's why stories like this belong on Jukebox Journey. Not because they're dramatic, but because they're honest. Because they show us how belief shows up after the headlines fade, after the injury, after the fear, after the prayers. And that didn't come with certainty. That's where faith actually lives. You also said something in this letter I want to make a point of. It deserves to be said out loud, okay? That you're thankful he's still here. That's not misplaced or sentimental. It's appropriate, right? Because we don't talk enough about being grateful not just for what an artist creates, but for the fact that they survived long enough to keep creating at all. Life is fragile, bodies are fragile, and none of this is guaranteed. And when someone comes back from a place where the story could have ended and chooses to build instead of retreat, that deserves respect. Think about our football players, okay? Think about that. Every single time we're watching a game and somebody gets injured, you're going to flip your wig because, oh my God, that's my team. Oh my God, that's my quarterback. That's my running back. No, see, you get it. Okay. What I see in Forrest Frank's work is not someone trying to lead or persuade, but someone walking his own path openly and imperfectly. Absolutely. And people recognizing themselves in it. And that's influence without force, testimony without performance. And just, I should probably say this, and I'm sorry I haven't yet. Waiting a little further in on this before with riffing for some reason. I'm trying to practice so I don't have to have so much script. But here's the thing, too. Okay. Forrest Frank, for those of you who do not know it, has videos on his YouTube, on his TikTok, all that stuff of him on a skateboard, landing and breaking his back. Now, he was still moving. It did not paralyze him, but it doesn't matter. In the back, it can be a teeny tiny chip and still paralyze you. We know this already, right? We know this. Hi, Kyle. Good to see you. Thanks for coming. So when you say faith changed your life, I don't hear exaggeration. I hear reflection, because faith that is lived quietly tends to ripple outward in ways the person living it may never see. And maybe that's the most powerful part of this story. Not the song, not the platform, not even the moment, but the reminder that healing is possible, gratitude can coexist with pain, and that faith doesn't have to be loud to be real. And that sometimes is the greatest gift an artist gives, isn't a hit record, okay? But proof that after everything stops, something honest, pardon me, I need to enunciate, can still be built. And that is worth honoring, at least to me. Okay. So I do have a good story here. Quite a bit to talk about, Mr. Frank. Let me get this going here. One moment. I don't know why it's taking me any longer. Okay, here we go. Now, before the injury, before the pause, before faith became something people could point to from outside, there was momentum. And momentum has a way of convincing a person that movement equals purpose, especially when youth, talent, opportunity, and affirmation arrive at the same time. Because when things are moving quickly and doors are opening, speed itself can start to feel like confirmation. In that season, what stands out isn't just the music behind or being made, but the pace of life surrounding it, the sense that everything is unfolding forward without interruption, and that forward motion can be intoxicating. But not because it's wrong, but because it's easy. When you're moving fast, you don't have to sit with uncertainty. And when you're producing constantly, you don't have to listen too closely to the quieter questions that tend to wait until the noise dies down. You know what? That's true for YouTube too. I know my creators know what I'm talking about here. So, identity begins to braid itself together with output. Productivity starts to feel like proof, and faith, when it's present, it often lives alongside the work rather than underneath it. Not because it isn't sincere, too many S's in that one, sorry, but because it hasn't yet been tested by stillness. That's not a flow or a flaw unique to any one person either. It's a pattern. It shows up again and again when life is generous with momentum. In those early stretches, relationships still matter: family, collaborators, community, but they often operate in the background, providing support while the spotlight stays fixed on what's being built and quickly isn't happening. So, what's important to understand about the part of the story, this particular part of the story, is not that nothing was broken yet. Okay, there was no public crisis, no collapse, no moment where anyone could point and say, this is where it all went wrong. There was simply a young artist living inside forward motion, doing what young artists do when the road is open and the future feels expansive. And that's what makes this season essential to the story, because without acknowledging the speed that came before, it's impossible to understand the depth of what came after. Momentum feels like security until it disappears, and continuity feels like it feels guaranteed until it isn't. Most people don't realize how much they rely on movement until they're forced to stop. It's pretty cut and dried in that situation there. It's absolutely being forced to stop. But in a culture that rewards acceleration, stillness can feel like stagnation. And slowing down can feel like losing ground. But before the break, slowing down wasn't part of the equation at all. Life was happening at a pace that didn't demand reflection, and reflection tends to wait patiently until it's unavoidable. Faith is the season in this season isn't absent though, okay, but it's quiet. It's often unexamined, woven into daily life without being, interrogated, because there hasn't been a reason to ask what holds when everything else is stripped away. That doesn't mean belief is shallow. It means it's unchallenged. And unchallenged faith often feels lighter because it hasn't had to carry the weight yet. The relationships that matter most are present, but they aren't being leaned on in the same way they will be later. Because independence hasn't been compromised, and vulnerability hasn't been demanded. When people look back on stories like this, there's a temptation to rush through this part, to treat it as a prologue or a setup rather than a chapter. But this is where the contrast is built. You can't understand grounding without flight, and you can't understand formation without first acknowledging the freedom that came before it. Momentum creates confidence, and confidence can be healthy, but it can also quietly teach a person that tomorrow will look like today. And that assumption goes unchallenged until something interrupts it. So, in hindsight, it's easy to assign meaning retroactively, to say that everything was leading towards a lesson, but in the moment, life simply feels open and full and in motion. So there is no sense that the ground is about to shift. That's why this part of the journey matters so much, because it reminds us that faith doesn't always arrive because something is broken. Sometimes it deepens because something breaks later. Before the entry, though, before the stillness, before the reckoning, there was a season where speed felt natural and forward motion felt earned. And that context matters, because when interruption finally comes, it doesn't arrive. Pardon me, my nose is going nuts today. It doesn't arrive to fix something that was wrong. It arrives to expose what was untested. And that's where the story truly begins, not at the moment of crisis, but in the season of momentum that made the pause so disorienting. Because, you can't understand what it means to be forced into stillness until you first understand how much was moving when everything suddenly stopped, right? Oh, my nose is trying to go nuts on me again. That's crazy. Okay, so breaking your back, it's not a metaphor, and it's not poetic, and it doesn't care who you are, what you were building, or even how fast life was moving before it happened. Because an injury like that doesn't arrive as a lesson. It arrives as a full stop. And when that kind of stop comes, it doesn't just interrupt a body. It interrupts identity and momentum and independence and certainty all at once. And a few more ands in there, I'm sure. What was once automatic becomes fragile. What was once assumed becomes conditional. And suddenly the future is no longer something you chase, but something you wait for. What is one of the hardest transitions a driven person can make? Stillness that's chosen feels different than stillness that's forced. And this was forced, which means it came with fear and vulnerability and a kind of humility that no amount of preparation can soften. In that space, the noise drops way away, whether you want it to or not, right? I'm sorry. I feel like I'm going to sneeze now. And when distraction disappears, the questions that speed kept quiet, they began to surface, not politely, but instantly, because there was nowhere left to hide from them. So, who am I if I can't move the way I used to? What holds me when productivity is gone? What remains when applause and output and forward motion are just stripped away? These aren't abstract questions when you're recovering from a serious injury like breaking your back. They become daily comparisons or companions too. Sitting beside you constantly in the quiet moments when the body is healing, slowly, and the mind is adjusting even more slowly. Recovery is not glamorous, and it doesn't reward optimism the way that people think it does. It rewards patience, repetition, endurance, and surrender. And surrender is especially difficult for someone whose life has been shaped by momentum. In this season, faith stops being something you carry publicly and becomes something you lean on privately. When language or without language, it's because belief in moments like this isn't about declaration, it's about survival. Family takes on different roles, not as background support, but as daily presence, caretaking, reassurance, and grounding, and dependence changes the shape of relationships in ways that independence never does. You listen differently when you need help. You receive differently when you have no leverage. And you begin to understand who stays close when there's nothing to offer in return. This is where faith is either reduced to theory or deepened into practice, because there are no external rewards for belief in recovery. No visible milestones that impress anyone else, no audience to affirm. Just quiet decisions made day after day to keep going without guarantees. And that's a rough place to be. It is. So the body heals slowly, right? Identity heals on its own timeline. And that timeline is rarely efficient or linear. There are setbacks, frustrations, and moments where progress feels invisible, and visibility is something many people mistake for failure, especially in a culture that treats visibility as proof of worth. But invisibility is also where formation happens, because when no one is watching, the only thing shaping you is what you choose to carry. This is the season where faith, if it survives, becomes anchored instead of ornamental, because it has had to bear weight instead of being admired. It's also the season where gratitude begins to change shape, not as a reaction to success, but as a response to survival. And those are two very, very different things. Gratitude, born from survival, doesn't deny pain. It acknowledges it fully and then chooses not to let it have the final word. What's important here is that this wasn't a moment where everything suddenly made sense. Recovery doesn't offer clarity on demand. Instead, it offers space. And space is uncomfortable because space invites reflection, and reflection forces honesty. The stillness that followed the injury, it created room for belief to move from the background into the center, not because someone decided it should, but because when everything else is stripped away, what remains becomes undeniable. This is where faith stops being inherited or assumed and becomes chosen, because it has been tested by fear, uncertainty, and vulnerability. When a person comes out of a season like this without bitterness, without resentment, without the need to weaponize pain, that isn't accidental. It's the result of countless quiet decisions made when no one else was watching. Recovery teaches a person how fragile life really is, how quickly plans can change, and how little control any of us actually have. And that awareness doesn't disappear when the body heals. It stays, shaping how a person moves forward. This is the turning point in the story, not because it's dramatic, but because it's formative. Because everything that comes after carries the imprint of this season, whether people recognize it or not. The music that emerges later, it doesn't come from ambition alone. It comes from having sat still long enough to listen, from having been humbled without being destroyed. And you know what? From having learned that faith is not proven by what you say when things are going well, but by what you cling to when nothing is certain. And when people walk through this kind of reckoning and come out with gratitude instead of anger, grounding instead of ego, and presence instead of performance, it tells you that something real has taken root here, something that will shape not just what they create next, but how they carry themselves long after the injury fades. And, you know, the memory, it just fades from your memory. This is the part of the journey where everything slows down enough for truth to surface. Sorry. You know, it's also where belief stops being theoretical and becomes lived, and where the foundation for everything that follows is quietly laid, not through spectacle, not through endurance, patience, and the decision to keep trusting, even when the outcome is unknown. All right, y'all. Pardon me, just grabbing my problem solver. Go lay down and leave me alone. Don't you dare bark. Now, I'm going to take a little break, give me some more tea, and fix this voice up a little bit. Y'all listen to this really cool song. I wrote it. It's about me. Thanks.
She came from the quiet storms, built a fire from the ground, turned a whisper to a warning. Now her voice shakes the town. Every setback was a lesson, every doubt became a key, unlocking something bigger. That's the rise of Boss B. When the lights go low, her vision hits high. She built a whole damn network off a promise and a try. Every sunrise, every moment, she's stacking legacy. This ain't just a channel, this is BBTV. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's the queen of the comeback, the storm in the stream, crafting stories out of heartbeats, making visions out of dreams. Got thunder in the hustle, got a voice that cuts clean. Every mic she touches turns the power unseen. So let further spin the numbers, let the views rise slow or fast. Boss B doesn't measure wins by echoes of the past. This moment is a pivot, this season's history. Bow down to the founder of the BBTV dynasty. Boss B rising, BBTV's igniting. Turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss B rising, sky ain't even the ceiling. When she hits go live, everybody feels it. She's got fire in the head, it's got truth in the frame, got a heart that won't retire and a gift watching as the numbers climb, but she's counting all the moments, not the dollar signs. From the late night grind to the daylight scene, she's building something bigger than the algorithm's dream. Boss be rising, BBTV shining, her story's rewriting, a legacy in real time. Boss be rising, BBTV's igniting, turn the volume up, yeah, the whole world's invited. From the gravel roads to the neon dreams, she built an empire out of broken wings. Boss be rising, sky ain't even the ceiling when she hits go live, everybody feels it. BBTV, where the stories breathe. BBTV, where the dreamers believe. Boss be rising, watch her take her place. This is BBTV, this is her grace.
Join Boss B for Ask a Bee Monday through Friday, 12 noon Central Standard Time and Jukebox Journey every Saturday, 8 p.m. Central Standard Time.
So when movement slowly returns and the body begins to heal, the world expects momentum to pick back up as if nothing happened. But the truth is that after a season of forced stillness, speed doesn't feel like the same anymore, you know? And because once you've had your independence interrupted, you carry that knowledge forward whether you want to or not. Recovery doesn't reset a person to who they were before the break. It reshapes how they move afterwards. And that's where this part of the story becomes less about injury and more about relationship. So relationship with faith and with family, with work, and, with the meaning attached to creating at all. What's different here is not just that music resumes, but that it resumes from a different center of gravity. One that's been recalibrated by vulnerability and dependence. Now, when someone has had to rely on others physically and emotionally and spiritually, it changes how they listen and how they collaborate and how they approach the act of making something public again. In this phase, family isn't just support, it's context. And community isn't just encouragement, it's accountability. And you know what? Faith isn't a companion to work. Companion to the work. It's the framework beneath it. This is where songs stop sounding like momentum and start sounding like reflection. Not because ambition disappears, but because ambition has been reordered. The need to rush is replaced by the need to be rooted. Pardon me. I'm thinking about my computer needing rebooting, apparently. But rootedness, it changes everything about how art is formed. When you've spent time in recovery, silence becomes familiar instead of threatening. And that that familiarity, it carries into the creative process. Writing doesn't come from urgency, not anymore. It comes from listening. And listening, when it's practiced honestly, reveals things that speed never allows space for. This is where gratitude begins to surface, not as a reaction to success, but, as a posture towards life itself. Because when you face the possibility of loss, continuation feels less like entitlement and more like gift. That shift shows up in tone, in pacing, in restraint, and in the absence of bitterness, which is not accidental. Bitterness is often the byproduct of pain that was never integrated, and integration requires time, support, and a willingness to sit with discomfort without turning it into narrative armor. What's notable in this season is how the music reflects a person who has chosen integration over performance, who isn't trying to leverage suffering for credibility, but also isn't pretending that it didn't happen. The work becomes quieter without becoming smaller, and the distinction matters because quiet work often carries more weight than loud declarations. This is also where relationships outside of the spotlight become more visible in their influence, because when a person rebuilds slowly, the people who walk alongside them, they leave fingerprints on what gets made. Encouragement shapes tone, stability shapes discipline, and belief, well, it shapes intention. Um, Intention, it shapes outcome. This is not a solitary comeback story. It's a communal one. Even if the community doesn't always see itself reflected in the final product. The decision to return to creating is not driven by pressure here, but by alignment. Alignment between belief and behavior, between message and method. That's why the music doesn't sound like it's chasing relevance. It sounds like it's honoring continuity and honoring the fact that life kept going even when everything else stopped. In this phase, faith becomes visible not because it's announced, but because it's consistent. And consistency is often the clearest evidence of transformation. The absence of spectacle, it's not a lack of conviction. It's a sign that conviction no longer needs to prove itself. When you listen closely, what you hear is not triumph, but steadiness. And steadiness is something that can only be learned through instability. This is also where trust deepens. Trust in the process and trust in the timing. Trust that the work doesn't have to arrive fully formed, to be honest. Creation becomes less about outcome and more about obedience to what really feels true in the moment. And that kind of obedience, I don't know, to me, that produces work that resonates across age and experience, because it's not asking anything of the listener except presence. That's why this phase connects to everybody so deeply, with people who have lived long enough to recognize the value of restraint, who understand that not every season needs to be loud to be meaningful. The rebuild isn't flashy and it isn't immediate, but it's durable because it's built on that foundations that were tested under pressure. When an artist emerges from recovery and chooses to create from gratitude instead of grievance, from belief instead of bravado, and from community instead of isolation, the work carries a different kind of authority. Not the authority of success either, but the authority of survival. And that authority doesn't announce itself. It reveals itself slowly through consistency, through tone, through the absence of pretense. This is the season where music becomes less about proving worth and more about expressing alignment. And alignment is something listeners feel even if they can't articulate it. The rebuild doesn't erase what came before, but it reframes it and places momentum in its proper place and replacing speed with intention. And it's from this recalibrated place that songs begin to emerge, not as declarations, but as reflections, carrying the imprint of everything that happened when the noise fell away. The only thing left was belief and patience and the decision to keep building quietly. This is where the work starts to sound like someone who knows what that continuation is not guaranteed, that faith is not ornamental, and that gratitude is definitely not performative. And those qualities don't just shape music, they shape how a person moves forward long after the injury is no longer visible. So, what makes the arrival of lemonade? Okay, it mattered. Let me start that again. What makes the arrival of lemonade it mattered? It isn't that it exists, okay? It's that it sounds like the natural conclusion of a long internal conversation. Rather, internal conversation rather than a reaction to pain. Because by the time this song appears, the story is no longer about recovery alone. It's more about what someone chooses to carry forward once recovery is possible. When people hear lemonade, they often talk about positivity and perspective or optimism. But that framing only scratches the surface because optimism can be performative, while perspective is earned. And this song carries the weight of someone who understands the difference. Lemonade doesn't pretend the lemons weren't sour, and it doesn't rush past the cost of what happened. Instead, it acknowledges loss and interruption and vulnerability without letting them all become identity. That balance is rare, though, because it requires a person to have fully integrated their experience rather than weaponize it. This is where everything that came before converges. You know, the momentum that once defined life, the forced stillness that stripped it away, the recovery that demanded patience, the relationships that held steady, and, the faith that moved from background belief into lived practice. And when those elements settle into alignment, what emerges is not a statement, but a posture. The song doesn't sound like it's trying to convince the listener of anything. And that's precisely why it resonates. Because conviction that has been tested, it doesn't need to announce itself. Instead, it invites reflection, and reflection is where real connection happens, especially for listeners who have lived long enough to know that gratitude doesn't arrive because circumstances are easy. It arrives because someone chooses it anyway. So, what's powerful here is that the song doesn't isolate faith from experience. It integrates. That's something else we've talked about all week. You have to blend it in. Treating belief not as a solution that erases pain, but as a framework that makes pain survivable. That's why people from different backgrounds, ages, and life stages hear different things in it, because the song doesn't dictate meaning. It creates space for meaning to surface. Younger listeners may hear hope and possibility and resilience, while older listeners hear survival and endurance and perspective earned through loss. And both interpretations are valid because the song doesn't collapse complexity into simplicity. This is also where the relationship, between artist and listener shifts, because the music, it stops being something consumed and starts being something shared, a companion rather than a performance. When somebody writes from this place, they aren't offering answers, they're offering honesty. That's kind of like what I want to do here. That's my whole format, really. But because honesty tends to travel farther than certainty. The reason Lemonade feels like a culmination rather than a pivot is because it doesn't abandon what came before it. It absorbs it, carrying the imprint of injury, recovery, faith, community, without centering any one of them as spectacle. So, pardon me. Yeah, work. I've hit my hour mark, and you can tell my voice is really screaming at me itself. So, before we close this out, though, I want to take a second to slow the room back down. Tonight wasn't about a catalog or a genre, okay? It was about a moment, about what gets built when life forces stillness, and how faith, family, and gratitude can reshape the work that came after, okay? That's what Jukebox Journey is always here to do. Follow the human thread and let the music sit where it belongs. As we wrap up, I do want to let you know what's coming up next around here. Sorry, VB will be back with updates and loops you can let run while you go about your day. And if you're looking for conversation or connection and support from other creators, make sure you check out Tuber Chat, and especially our wonderful team, the Iron Sharpening Iron Universe. It's one of those spaces, both of them are where questions are welcome and nobody has to pretend that they've got it all figured out. I'm going to rest this voice now. Apparently, I'm a little misread today, but I appreciate you. A horse. Yes, I'm that old. But I appreciate you being here, listening, and sharing this space with me. It's this journey. If this journey resonates, let it sit with you. We'll pick it back up next time. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Right now, I'm going to do a little promoing, and then I'm out of here. Thanks, guys. Love y'all. Been a wonderful evening. I appreciate you.
Before we roll on, I want to take a second to shout out Tuber Chat, because once again they showed up and held space the way real community does. This channel isn't about noise or numbers chasing, it's about consistency, respect, and actually supporting creators without strings attached. That matters more than people realize. If you're looking for a place that lifts voices instead of talking over them, Tuber Chat is that lane. I appreciate the time, the encouragement, and the steady presence more than I can properly wrap into words. So much love to the Tuber Chat crew for doing what you do and doing it the right way.
Tuber!
If you're enjoying this show, subscribing is the easiest way to support what's being built here on BBTV. You'll see the join button right next to subscribe. No pressure, no expectations, just an option for people who want to support the channel in a real way. We're live weekdays at 12 p.m. Central, and each day has its own focus. Same honesty, same voice, just different conversations depending on the day. And if you've got a story you want to share, send it in. Anonymous is always fine.
How you like that?